Good morning. This is the House Transportation Committee. It is February 19th. And first, on our agenda is a report this committee asked for last year in our transportation bill. And it has to do with the active transportation policy report. It was section 47 of last year's bill. And today we have Amanda Holland from the Asset Management Department that's going to be going through this report and telling us her findings. So welcome.
Welcome,
Take
thank
it
you.
away.
Thank you, and checking and sharing. So yes, I'm Amanda Holland with the Agency of Transportation. Last year I was with Asset Management.
Oh, that's what
I
it
am.
says. My bad.
No, I'm now with the Operations and Safety Bureau.
All
And,
right. You want to make that change in the committee? That'd be great.
So yeah,
First time
today,
in charge and I'm messing up the witnesses. Titles. All right.
We're all there to make it up.
It'll be great.
I'd rather be loose.
So yeah, so I'm going to do an overview of the report of the Vermont statutes that relate to vulnerable road users. And so just to review quickly the request, it was to report, the agency was to report on the effort to conduct a comprehensive review of statutes, including those in Titles 19 and 23, relating to the rights and responsibilities of vulnerable road users, pedestrians and bicyclists, to inform best practices and policy outcomes. We will develop the report in consultation with relevant stakeholders, and it shall include a summary of the review efforts and recommendations. And I went the wrong way. And with that, why were we conducting this effort? It was to conduct it to gain an understanding of the current laws that govern active transportation users and their modes of travel. Regulatory provisions for all road users should be periodically reviewed and amended to keep pace with changes in technology, infrastructure, demographics, and roadway safety. To identify areas of misalignment between statutes that can happen over time and ascertain the need to advance future recommendations in proposal for amendments to statute. And how we engage stakeholders in this assessment phase. This first part was we hold monthly meetings with active transportation partners facilitated by VTrans. And so through conversations with that group last calendar year, as well as one-on-one communication with stakeholders.
Representative Pouch.
Sorry.
Can you just say who some of the stakeholders are? Yeah.
Sure. So I think it's detailed more in the report, but it is the active transportation partners are Locomotions. It's on there. It's a lot of the external partners. So some nonprofits, AARP, some of the T4VT folks. Also have the health department, Forest Parks and Rec, ACCD. So there's representatives of different programs. ACCD, it's the Downtown Transportation Fund representative. So it's trying to bring together folks to either, the original intent was to work through the bike ped strategic plan implementation.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
This is background, which is part of your bread and butter, but the purposes of law, as we know, is to define permissions, expectations, and standards. So as it pertains to transportation, that's Title 19 and 23. Those provisions provide the safe and efficient travel for all road users and guide the orderly movement along roadways. And these are evolving process to address conditions as needs change, and provisions for active transportation users were first established in 1971. Pedestrians have not changed as much. Most of the amendments have happened primarily for bicyclists, just given the nature of the mode that can go both on-road and off-road facilities. Going to review how we conducted the legislative review, which is in section 3 of the report. So in step 1, I started off by just reviewing statutes and to capture all provisions that are specific to pedestrians and operators of bicycles, and more importantly, incorporated provisions that address the interaction among these users with motor vehicles. And the output of that review is the Appendix A that's in the report. That appendix is a planning reference for understanding and informing policy and regulation related to active transportation users. So it's something that we as the agency, along with our partners, will be using when we are having discussions on on topics. And then after that, the other part of it was assessing the state of practice both nationally and in other states for how they are modernizing traffic laws and reviewing the state provisions in comparison to that with a focus on clarity and association. With that, the next part of it is section 3, which is the summary of the findings of the legislative review. So these following slides will catalog the regulatory subjects and the specific statutes that were identified. The findings do require further investigation to determine whether the agency would support further action to amend statutes. And I've also noted on there that these findings are based on the understanding of the staff that conducted the review and may not be another's understanding and or interpretation of statute. In the first section, I'm just going to read the headings in the bullet. You know, the 3.1 identified the location of base definitions, just noting earlier that Title 19 is more about the infrastructure, Title 23 is more about the users. As things have been added over time, there's a couple of definitions that go in both. So the suggestion is, you know, identifying an area where we could sync those up so that it's just one spot to be finding them. Moving on to section 3.2, mode of travel classification. This is an area where further review is warranted for clarity and accommodation of practices, as it's, you know, an example. So some of the things that are on here is what is a classification of other modes? So how are we having our statutes to ensure that as the evolving modes happen, they can be captured in one of the existing categories so people know where they're allowed to be. Also identifying best practice for the term personal mobility device. Similarly, identifying best practice to revert persons with ambulatory disabilities in traffic law. And the last one in this category is motor assisted bicycle versus electric bicycle. And so for an example of, you know, that last one, there's the differentiation between motor assisted bicycle versus electric bicycle has needs some clarification given they're both classified as bicycles. However, one has a difference in maximum motor power, and then one is that also then prohibited on sidewalks. So just working through and having discussions to see if those provisions are still meeting our needs. To work through these, the agency will be meeting with stakeholders to discuss definitions and interpretations with DMV, the Forest Parks and Rec. Forgetting the spell out of dial. But stakeholder groups such as Locomotion and AARP. A lot of acronyms in my brain right now. Section 3.3 is the rights of facility users. So the items highlighted here include provisions to clarify the regulation of travel modes on specific facilities, as well as address provisions that need updated to meet current standards or address context that has been lost over time to amendments. So here we have operation of bicycles and sidewalks, which gets at noting how sidewalks are currently defined. Enhanced interpretation of where devices may travel. There's a bike lanes and paved road shoulders definitions and to be updated both to meet today's practice as well as state national standards. And pedestrian clearance area and clarify expectations of road users to exercise due care are two areas where some of the context has been lost over time. So it's a determination of whether those are still applicable, and if so, how do we return the full context to those pieces? The next one. The next area is modernization of provisions. So this is more of the catch-all of some of the others. It spans many topics, and these again need further review and consultation with stakeholders. One of them is a national practice to have a definition that acknowledges all road users as traffic, so puts it more holistically. Some minor definition changes or additions for bicycle control signals or pedestrian control signals. While these are regulated and their purpose is defined in the MUTCD, the statutes gets more to the explanation of how your responsibilities at those devices. Terminology and user evolution of the shared use path. Currently, we talk about it as a bicycle path and inclusive use of bicycles, which is not how that has evolved over time. Facility type requiring a vehicle to yield to pedestrians, operating impaired, operation of bicycles at controlled intersections, which will be the next presentation, and parking near pedestrian and bicycle facilities. There's a lot of different ones there. The last section in here is 3.5, which is harmonization among state agencies. And these two items relate to ongoing agency efforts from other state agencies and just ensuring that we are aware of current efforts and coordinated as applicable. The first one is a reference to the work currently being done by the Forest Parks and Rec to update their policies on devices that are allowed to be using their trails. Maybe see if there's ways that we should be syncing up so that we're referring to the same things and have less public confusion that way. And the second one is referring to just communicating with the group that did a report in 2022 where they identified a few things on motor vehicle offenses. So with that, this is, in the 6 months since this was given to us and finished, this was really kind of the first initial assessment phase. The agency is going to continue this calendar year to be working through these with stakeholders and having some discussion. And that's outlined in this section 4. This is, the first part would be stakeholder consultation. Identified will be continuing to meet. Last year was the first calendar year that we had the active transportation partners. We will continue to meet regularly with those. Also having direct coordination and communication with the different state agencies as well as other subject stakeholder groups. And again, just continuing to be informed of these decisions and conversations with standards, and implementation as the last one as applicable. If there are to advance recommendations for statutory amendments, presuming that the agency finds and identifies items that we want to take the lead role on drafting, that we would aim to develop a proposal for consideration in a subsequent session. So that is all of my slides. So I'll just either end it there, or I can leave it up, but then I'll open it up for more questions or comments.
Please, Representative White.
So thank you for that. So at this point, there aren't really any conclusions. It's just you've been meeting with stakeholders, you've identified areas that need to be detailed more, but there are recommendations or for things to change or at this point.
That is correct. So we don't have any statutory language or provision recommendations at this point in time.
Okay. And that will be coming next year or?
We will continue to work on them. I know that it all depends on the timing of when we work through things and trying to meet the timeline of when it then needs to go through the process of becoming a bill. So I think the intention is to see if there's things that we could be preparing, if applicable, for next session. But
Okay.
we need to see how the process goes.
Yeah, thanks for this. So it sounds like, you got all the stakeholders together and you found, hey, there is some inconsistency here. We should at least clarify some of the statutes so that they talk to each other and it's clear. And then you can say if I'm misspeaking. And then it seems like, you saw additional opportunities to work toward some of these to align the statutes and some of other agency terminology and expectations, and here's what we think. And that, potentially at the end would come some legislative language that sort of says, here's here's a good approach to align all of these sort of policies. Do you need us to do anything more to continue this work? Because it sounds like you see an opportunity to continue the work, but I'm not sure I hear, we're moving forward and next year, we'll be there. So, yeah. Take it from there.
Yeah, well, so as you know, last year when Kevin Marshall was here to introduce the kind of evolution of the agency's bike ped position into to the active transportation unit. Part of that vision was to have one staff person be focusing on the planning and policy, and this was, if you will, the effort that was bestowed upon me to look at this and just again see if there's anything that we the agency think is necessary or arises to a priority to serve the public and highway safety, but also to facilitate conversation. So I am a little hesitant to put a deadline just because I will say I was, provided some of the language for this provision through Chair Coffey last time, and I might have been a little more thinking it could move more quickly than it can. But I just know, as you know, that this does take time and consideration. For this first phase, it really was a lot of pulling information together. And so, as I noted, we haven't had as much stakeholder engagement in terms of digesting and conversing on this material. So that's what really will be the next phase and understanding, again, these are some of the things that was identified from our point of view as the agency, and maybe speaking with the disabilities of aging and independent living, accessibility, like maybe they're do not see some of these as priorities. So that's where we need to have the conversation from the different points of view to bring it all together.
So I guess feeding off Representative Couch's question, without a new initiative from our end, will you take that up or would you need that assistance from us? But or do you feel like this mission has been sort of accomplished? You did what you were supposed to do in last year's report, or do you need a new
mission
mandate from us to continue those dialogues?
I do not believe I need a mandate. I will be continuing to do the effort as laid out here.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm not saying I wasn't accusing.
No, I know.
Sometimes
I understand.
pushes the agency in a certain direction. Without that, they're like.
Yeah, so Jesse Devlin, I am the Safe Systems Manager at VTrans for the record. I oversee the Active Transportation Group along with the State Highway Safety Office, as well as some safety engineers. And just to kind of add on to this, specifically, I don't think we need an action from the committee to continue these efforts. Amanda's kind of laid out framework for how we'll utilize this initial phase as kind of a springboard to further conversations and figure out what is really most valuable to, the active transportation community, the transportation network, and all the parties involved. And, we view this as an opportunity to make changes that will, potentially really help all. So, we see this as something that we're not relying on this committee to tell us what to do. We want to do. So.
So we got 2 or 3, if you haven't spoken yet, if you would like to represent.
Yeah, I just wondering about the degree to which you've been able to ascertain how much NEPA requirements are a challenge that are making things slower, harder, more expensive to implement in terms of bike ped in our roadways. So, and I know that, all those kinds of things potentially could be changing at the federal level. So, but I remember that you were curious about that. And I just was wondering if you had any update for us.
Sure. So again, since that's more of the permitting side, it's not addressed it here, but since that was that issue was raised last year from the in the draft bill, it is something where the agency, both myself and then someone from the Historic Resources Review staff are connecting with some of the stakeholders of interest. So I'm working, with Jonathan at Local Motion and some other folks, and to have some discussions to again, similar to this, get all on the same page. So I know that there have been some permitting challenges over time, and that those have been addressed in future iterations of help me out, what's the the agreement? Yes, well, so the section 106 and the categorical and exclusions. So in terms of that, there's right now, I mean, we are having stakeholder conversation just to get on the same page to see if there still are challenges and if those are, what that then means.
Right, thank you.
Representative, Powell?
Yeah, thanks. I think the committee could consider whether we put something in the T-bill that sort of says, looking forward to a follow-up report. Even if it's just a verbal report, but to know that, this work continues. It'd be interesting to hear from stakeholders like AARP, would be one that I think, has a significant, or Local Motion, just sort of how the process is going and make sure, I think just to sort of make sure everybody, yes, we should continue just like you're suggesting we do. And then just had one other question. Was there, you talked about the signages, was there any activity about like general practices for, I'll say road design? I always go back to Heinsberg, right? I mean, on how to get traffic and other, I think you said we're calling that other transportation, get all the transportation to sort of work together on a figure, on a more, I'll say, design scale, or not looking to change every road, but just, best practices, let's say. So was there much, did it get that far or?
Initially so as I mentioned, like this did just focus on Title 19 and 23. There are some other areas of statute that do go into transportation policy. And while I did initially start to look at some of those, I did not take them any further, just because right now I think that we will pick that up again. Right now there's the Vermont State Standards update, which I believe you'll be getting a presentation on tomorrow, maybe. And so I think there's a lot of things at play that are all going to work well together. So letting that get to its next stage this year, and then seeing how that aligns with, again, just as this was, it's looking at, besides just clarity, does this still align with our current practice?
I think I'll just make a statement. I think that makes sense. I mean, because any of these things we're doing, if you open the door, it just becomes so big. That seems to be a good focus. Thank you.
Representative White, if you want to go again?
I would like to, yes. I have a clarification and then a question. So just going back to your presentation, how you called out different electric bikes and kind of different definitions for as well as sidewalk use. So my assumption is that in phase 2 of your meetings with your partners, that you'll come up with some recommendations regarding language around different types of e-bikes and kind of what is allowed on sidewalks, if bikes are allowed on sidewalks at all. Those types of recommendations is that?
That will be things that will be discussed in terms of whether we'll be able to come to a resolution. I mean, that's a good question. Part of why this is at the stage it is it's not simple. Like maybe that first one where I'm like, if we could just move the definitions, but really when you dive into it, I mean, I don't think the classification of e-bikes in the 3 classes is pretty much nationally at that level, but nationally, both at, the other DOTs, I guess, are grappling with these same conversations. So some of it is seeing where we can make some improvements now, and maybe we still need to like do some more thinking about how to create provisions that then make sense to, for us as traveling public to be able to follow.
Right. It's like we were talking last week about one of the rail trails and electric bike usage on the rail trail, and what Leonard Casey, who's not here this morning, or at least not sitting in that chair, but he's watching, but talked about, there is a level of electric bike which is more like a dirt bike, and you really don't need to pedal it, and it's more like it goes really quite fast. So I think there are some regulations on the rail trail in terms of like how fast an e-bike could go to be allowed on the rail trail. So just thinking that clarifications like that could be helpful. My question is, this study, are you all looking at, I know you're looking at definitions of users, but are you also looking at signage, like current laws protecting bicyclists on the road, for example, and the 4-foot law for cars to follow? Are you looking at those regulations and kind of how well Vermont is doing in terms of communicating those regulations to the public, or is that not part of the purview?
I would say that's not part of this particular project. That doesn't mean that it's not part of our conversations at the agency, but in terms of this, just focusing more on law, and that would be more our policy and guidance for, we consider signs such as the 4-foot passing rule in our overall messaging and signage packets along the road. So it's something that, is a tool in the toolbox that would be considered in terms of what is appropriate for this corridor and ensuring that we're traveling safely.
Well, we're okay for time. I apologize for this morning, neighbor in need, and put me a little bit behind. For the committee and for you as well, Amanda, thanks and Jesse, thanks for joining us. The idea being that there's an accountability piece it'll be throughout all the committees and pushed from the speaker's office. We had worked with legislative council to go back through the last 2 T-bills and say, what have we asked the agency to do? And now we ask them to come in and testify to whether they did or did not and make progress on those pieces, which leads us to kind of 3 questions we need to be asking ourselves as we go through all of these kind of agenda items, at least from my perspective. What did the law require, and did they do that or not? Are we satisfying that piece of it? Does there need to be another check-in, another check back at some point? Or is there additional steps to make that happen? Is there an additional check-in point that we need to require or put on our schedule? And if so, what kind of time frame would that be? And I guess lastly, is there additional testimony? And we'll have some time in discussion whether we want to see that happen. And we still have a few minutes, anybody can make that. But those would be the kind of the things that I'd be looking around for the committee as the topics that are coming up on the kind of accountability piece. What was the law? What do we ask them to do? Did they accomplish it? Do we need to check back in? And do we need to hear from somewhere else? Is there any additional testimony that we need to hear regarding that particular topic? So that's the sort of accountability as our legislative body responsibility and sort of level of accountability. That's what we're trying to get at here. You're welcome to comment on that. If anybody has any comments, whether we need additional testimony or what another check-in date might be. I'm not really in the spot to answer any of those myself right this second, with my apologies for missing part of the presentation, but that's what I'd like us to make sure we're ready to answer when it comes to any of these accountability issues. Or do we need to check back in? Do we need additional testimony? Are we all set? Can we move on? So if anybody has any comments, they're welcome to, or we'll go to the next topic, which is the same presenter. So we don't have as big a
I
transition.
appreciate it, and I appreciate the work, and I appreciate the fact that it can be hard to get it focused and getting all the stakeholders. I can understand. The list that you had was a good list. It seems appropriate. It would be good to just hear from a stakeholder, or just like, yes, let's keep going. Or maybe they might say, hey, here's, maybe it needs to have a different focus. I don't know, just to verify that we are all moving in the right direction. I appreciate it. Thank you.
In this particular case, I did hear a mention of the AARP and they are here on Friday. So
Mhm.
if you'd like them to expand that piece, certainly there's a great chance to speak to our committee assistant relating to that and expanding it on their presentation on Friday. If there's a question you want answered, there's an opportunity there.
Would be good. And I assume we'll hear from local motion at some point, so we can also ask them the same question.
They have visited before. We'll have some more questions perhaps for them. I almost had to have you identify yourself when you threw in the help from earlier. So. Representative White?
Just in response to your question, Chair, about follow-up, perhaps this is moving more quickly, but one thought was, could we ask Amanda to come back at the end of the session in May? We might have some time that we're trying to fill in late May. If you could come back and just bring some, if you have any recommendations or kind of check in where you've gotten so far with stakeholders. Again, I don't know if that gives you enough time, but it'd be nice to hear a review before we go out of session. I'd be interested in that.
Mhm. Anybody else? Thank you very much for that portion. Are you staying in the chair for the next one or are you guys swapping or?
Staying.
I don't know if I needed to switch. Maybe I didn't need to
Yeah, I
switch.
think it's the same.
All right, well, just to be safe, I switched. Thanks.
Ready whenever, I think we're ready whenever you are. I think we're moving on to the Idaho stop. And the discussion, there was a request to include that language in the T-bill last time and we did not correctly. And we asked for more information, I believe. Somebody that's more clear on, somebody that rides a bicycle might have more opinions than I.
Somebody who has a husband who rides a bicycle.
I reached out to a friend of mine that's big in bicycling and whatnot about this very thing, and I'll comment on that later. But first, we'll hear what do we find out and where are we at, I guess.
Well, thank you, Chair. And again, Amanda Holland, the Vermont Agency of Transportation and the Active Transportation Unit. And this is going to be another overview of what's in the report. And while it is referenced as the Idaho stop, we did modify the name to report on the operation of bicycles at controlled intersections, recognizing that it's broader than the one catchy title. And in terms of the request, it was to identify potential effects of enabling language from individuals operating a bicycle at intersections, to have rights and responsibilities that differ from those applicable to those individuals operating a vehicle. Why was this considered? Well, primarily to enhance safety and mobility, secondarily to encourage mode shift and acknowledge that this is a behavior considered a common practice in use. In terms of how did we do this, we conducted an evidence-based review, looked at reports of motor vehicle crashes, citations to operators of bicycles, and just review of current infrastructure to evaluate the effectiveness of provisions to improve safety at intersections and or address existing concerns. And then we also identified impacts and considerations that should be necessary if one or more of these provisions were further considered and implemented. The section 1.3, just to make sure we're all on the same page, reviews the scenarios that were being considered. And I'll be walking through with this, each one of the sections, the 4 different scenarios that were evaluated are broken down here. So allow an individual operating a bicycle the right to first is treat a stop sign as a yield sign, notice the stop as yield or safety stop. Treat a flashing red light at a traffic signal as a yield sign. Treat a steady red light at a traffic signal as a stop sign. And the 4th one is proceed through a signalized intersection when a pedestrian signal is in a leading pedestrian interval phase, meaning the walk or countdown phase. And at that time, the traffic for vehicles is red for parallel and through traffic or turning traffic. So the key point, what changes and what does not change. What does not change in any of these scenarios is who has the right of way at the intersection. So if you're at a stop sign, it's still who has the right of way, who's there to stop first. If 2 are stopped, then following the same rules. But what does change is how an individual would proceed through that intersection. So if you were a bicyclist at a stop sign, would you slow your speed and be prepared to stop if necessary versus come to a complete stop, which for a bicyclist technically means put your foot down and then proceed with caution. So that's one thing to clarify is that, again, right of way as defined would not be changing. And then just to, quickly just review existing conditions that are in the law. Bicycles and motor vehicles are defined as separate classes, road category classes, and the primary classification difference is the source of propulsion. And with that, Vermont law requires bicyclists to respond to traffic signals and signs with the same instruction as as the drivers of a vehicle, minus any exceptions granted in statute. And at the very bottom there, which is blocked by my cursor, is just noting that electric bikes are categorized as bicyclists. I'm going to jump to talking about some of the things that is noted in section 2.3. So also just again, like what are our existing conditions or what's going on today when we talk about this. So again, why are rules important? Well, we need to create a safe network, and the rules provide predictability of movement. When you approach a traffic signal, you know how to react to the situation. However, rules and instruction is predicated on each individual's compliance and adherence to the rules, as we all know. But how do individuals learn or know to follow the rules? Well, there's many different touch points that reach all of us at different ages. In the second part of the slide, I've noted there's a statewide safety outreach and education program in Vermont. This is made up of a network of entities. And some of the programming they do to reach different ages include school programs that target youth, as well as how-to programming for adults. Again, thinking of AARP, they do some how-to for adult training. Formal education of new drivers and cyclical campaigns to give current drivers a refresher on responsibilities. So that's currently how we are disseminating information. And I went the wrong way. Oh, no. In terms of, looking at existing conditions in our evidence-based analysis, to consider the applicability of these provisions to improve safety, we reviewed past 10 years of crash data. So from 2014 to 2023, if you look at the graph here, you'll see all the years provided out, and the bars equal the total number of bicyclists that were involved in vehicle crashes. With the top color is that darkish purple. Those are property damage only crashes. The one below that, which is a lighter purplish color, is suspected minor injury. Below that is a lightish orange, which is suspected serious injury. And the very bottom one is fatality. You can see that for some, the number is off to the side. There were 8 total fatalities. Yes.
Representative Pouch?
I was wondering if we have any data that shows how many bicycles are on the road. Are they increasing or decreasing? Because if they're increasing significantly, I would say, oh, maybe crashes are going down a little bit. If they're, not, then, kind of puts it in perspective.
There is limited data in terms of, it's kind of thinking of, we have a lot of data that counts and gives us information on the volume of cars that are going through. We do not, to date, have a statewide program that really collects a lot of that piece of it. We do have sporadic counts through our partners, or not sporadic, but point counts through our partners, such as the regional planning commissions. But this topic is one that is being discussed and determined if there's initiation the agency wants to take through our active transportation unit. So, but
Okay,
today,
yeah, that's just a question. Thanks.
Councilman Wells?
Is there one, that's a high number in Chittenden County. I know there's more people there. Are there one or two places where you're getting the bulk of your crashes? There's a street in Burlington where it's notorious for a lot of bicycle crashes, right? What is that street and what are the top two areas that are getting a lot of contact here?
sure, I would have to get back to you on the specifics of these numbers in that level of detail. I mean, we do have I didn't go down to the, look at the specific areas beyond just the higher level considerations for this, but we do have that information, so I could. If you would like to know more information of, if there's hot spots in particular areas, we could.
Mike Donahue, a former reporter for Free Press, was telling me one particular street in that area, but I can't remember which one it was. Anybody from Chittenden County here that knows the layout?
And Shelburne Road is certainly got a lot.
Yeah.
Is that where they're?
Yeah.
Shelter
Demolitions.
Representative Burt?
Yeah, do you know what the extent of the bicycle safety provisions are taught in driver ed classes? Is it mandated? Or is it sort of, I mean, I know somebody who used to do like being in Brattleboro, which I think she was just volunteering. So I just wonder if it's sort of hit and miss, or what kind of driver education are students getting around safe operation around bicyclists?
Sure, so that's a good question. That would be good for our state highway safety office, as well as our DMV partners who coordinate and work with the folks that do driver's education. But yeah, I don't myself have the knowledge of that, what is currently taught.
Is it possible to get that information from somewhere? Could you get that?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Representative Wells?
Yeah, it strikes me that the transparency page and also maybe some kind of landing page of our wonderful new DMV site could provide, like, did you know, like, these are the changes, just to kind of get the information out, like on forefoot passing, for example. So since it seems like there's sort of a lag between, when the bill gets passed and rulemaking and signs and all that. So just, getting the word out.
I will circle back to talking about some of that towards the end of this presentation, because that is a key point from this report. All right, so just to quickly review the high level of the data here. So in that 10-year period, there were 760 motor vehicle crashes that have occurred that involved cyclists. 55 of those were reported as occurring at intersections. But when you look further at the data, there are some this occurrence could be as high as 75% if you're looking a little at crashes that are near the intersections. As we talked about, 59% occurred in the Chittenden County greater area as defined by those communities. And 11% of these crashes are major crashes, which include the incidents of that result in a cyclist fatality or suspected serious injury of cyclists. So those bottom two categories of orange on the graph. Now, those major crashes that I just mentioned are ones that record the most detail and really allow for further analysis. So of those 760, we were able to take those 85 major crashes and look a little bit deeper to, and we identified that the top three circumstances that contributed to a crash event. So these are the things as reported by that user directly before the crash. And from the perspective of both the driver and the bicyclist, the top most frequent was no improper driving or action. And the third most frequent was failure to yield of right of way. And just in summary of the evidence-based review, some insights were gained, such as the majority of crashes occur at or nearby intersections, but further analysis really is limited by the data that's available. No citations were issued to cyclists for actions in conduct at intersections in this 10-year period, such as a citation for conducting a rolling stop versus a complete stop. And just for provision applicability, both these signs and signals intersections are prevalent statewide, as we likely have encountered. And this one has a lot of information on it, but it's all the summary of section 3. So the state of the practice nationally. This information began gathered from available synthesis reports and direct communication with DOTs. And so to start off with some context, what triggered the Idaho stop or the stop as yield in the 1980s? Idaho is a state that was actively enforcing the requirement of a complete stop, so putting your foot down, and ticketing cyclists. So this was seen as a technical violation and action to reduce the caseload in courts. But since then, there are states that have adopted one or more of the scenarios reviewed. One state has allowed bicyclists to utilize a pedestrian signal, and that's California, just passed that last year, so not a lot of time since enactment. And 10 states have adopted a variation, it should really say it, a variation of the stop as yield, because those 10 states have all adopted the stop as yield provisions. It's just when you consider the Idaho stop, it might take into consideration what you might do at a traffic signal. And in terms of what we've learned from them, I mean, there are reports that do talk about the secondary benefits, but there's not a lot of scientific research that has really stood behind it. If you're looking at statistical evidence, that then no research to date has found the reductions made a significant difference on crash records. So maybe that's just not the right way to be considering it, but it's the data that we have. In terms of how are these states themselves disseminating safety education? Well, each state does have a state highway safety office that may or may not be an entity within the Agency of Transportation. Sometimes it's even its own non-state entity. But that is the entity that administers the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, federal grant funding program. And under each state highway safety office in this grant program is a transportation safety professionals that work together to achieve the goals. And this is really a necessary network to get at that multi-pronged approach of effectiveness and trying to reach people on their
I'm not sure if you read or mentioned the bullet on the left side at the bottom, National Highway endorsed as a safety. So they endorsed those provisions. Is that what it says? I mean, wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, they did put out a fact sheet in 2023, or like just overall the fact sheet for right now that did endorse the safety provisions. Again, when looking at some of the data and like the most available data, it's the crash records, there's not statistically finding that that's different, but just working through other types of information. And there is a more recent one as well.
Representative Thomason and then Representative Clark.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just wondering when you last scanned for data on this, because I'm looking at a report from the National Department of Transportation specifically on this that says it did find that say laws were associated with reduced crash rates. So did you take that into consideration?
Can you tell me what the title, or like
The title is Bicyclist Stop as Yield Law Analysis, and it's looking at the 10 states that have implemented this, from what I can see.
I think that is the one that came out in December.
Yeah.
And I did not, so that would have been after I would have done this, but I did read that this weekend.
Okay.
I think that I mean, similarly, when you're looking at data, my read of that was that you could inferences, there were some people, they've done a lot of looking at before and after, and there is some percent change improvement shown, but it's hard to, what some of the research says is it's hard to attribute that back to that happened because of the law change and not some other factors. But so I guess I don't know. I have the science background. So in me, I'm like statistically significant. How can you control for other variables? So it's my read.
So you have, one state has allowed bicyclists to utilize their pedestrian signals, so when they get to a stop or a red light, they can press the pedestrian signal and use that to cross. Is that what that means?
That one is referring to it was the kind of fourth described in the scenarios where if you are, could be if you are on a sidewalk, but also if you're in the road and the pedestrian signal is on, then, and all of the cars are stopped, you can proceed. So again, it's about getting, the intent is to reduce exposure and more visibility, similar to, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. You didn't want to state that, it's just for
California.
Thank you.
Representative Pound?
So I'd say there's no clear data showing it's safer. At the same time, there's no clear data showing it goes in the wrong direction, which is not what we want to go against.
That's correct. My interpretation or my read of things is that it is more neutral. But there is a lot of other ways that you could look at it. So I think that I know that there's some other studies. I think the one I put on the bottom here is another one that I looked at. So the one in 2023 where I pulled out a little piece on they did a lot of surveys and trying to get a sense of from the Northwest states that adopted it, what has been the impact. They looked a lot at the effectiveness of the outreach and education. And so they've, similarly found that it's hard to ascertain that if it's making a difference, but it isn't causing the practice.
I know you got a lot more to go, and we obviously got a lot of questions.
They're information dense slides, so I don't have too many more here. Let me think if there's anything else. I think the main part was just that last bullet of noting that it really is a multi-pronged approach for effectiveness. I mean, every entity has its own stakeholder group that it can reach. So it's really making sure that we get that out there to a lot of people. Did I go the right way? Yes, I did. So these last slides are summarizing the direct and indirect impacts, again, from the perspective of transportation safety professionals. And these are inclusive of the perspective from the Agency of Transportation, Department of Public Safety, and DMV. So obviously the first direct impact would be to Vermont laws. It would necessitate an amendment to statute, and if provisions should move forward, they should address how each one should proceed in the direction of travel, identify the exemptions applicable to road users, and really also convey what actions might be a violation of statute. And in the report, in some of these sections, there are examples from some of the other states of how they have considered what they've adopted and how that has impacted things. But then looking at informing the professionals, so another direct impact, it requires dissemination of information to a broad range of people, professionals statewide. So that's staff at those 3 state agencies who all have responsibility to convey motor vehicle laws and guidance for safe travel on highways. You could see the preliminary list of those folks here from those state agencies. So obviously this would be information that would go statewide for general awareness of all the professionals, but then really diving into the specific units and divisions of each of those state agencies and the things that they are, programs that they are responsible for. which it does get back to, driver's education curriculum, driver school and training, as well as safety education. And let me see. So yeah, it would be giving this information to them. Those professionals then would decide based on the language changes, what impacts it might have to their programming and what actions they need to take. So again, main point that I just put in there is the changes in traffic laws and road rules need to be disseminated to many entities. And this ties us back to informing the public using our statewide safety outreach and education programming in Vermont. So for this one, I'm bringing it back to the how and the who, conducts safety education and our network of professionals that work together. So on the right part of the slide, it lists the emphasis areas, the educational emphasis areas that are identified in the strategic highway safety plan, and the list lists the range of professionals that are in our network. So they cover educators, law enforcement, first responders, municipalities, nonprofits. And so when it comes to informing and educating the public, a starting point is dissemination by entities engaged in that specific emphasis area. So for example, for these provisions, that emphasis area is vulnerable road users. And through this network, we work with Locomotion and the Vermont Department of Health and their road user safety group. So that would be one first touch point if you were to be disseminating this information. But really that broader range of partners addressing those complementary focus areas of road safety education would also need to determine how to incorporate this into their information as it pertains to the expectations and anticipation of an individual's behavior on the road. So if you're thinking about programs that are training young drivers or distracted driving, again, it's like for those, you're really trying to make sure that people understand what the rules are and what they should be anticipating as people's movement. So there's some highlights of the fiscal year 2020, federal fiscal year 2025 safety education programming right there, which is what's going on now by those partners. And so, a key point here is that, at the agency, education activities and partner programming, again, are supported by that NHTSA federal grant program, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, to the point made of response time, in order to develop and have a plan for how you're going to be informing people of rule changes, there needs to be the informed professional to then have time to plan and build it into their educational programming. So essentially, it's hard to quickly pivot if it's not already associated with the work that you're doing. And just its summary, this is really the points that are in the report, but again, based on the evidence-based analysis, it did not determine a clear safety benefit based on past crashes, and nor is there a specific issue to address, such as citations for a technical issue. However, there are assumed safety benefits that could be attained, reported by in the research in other states. Legislative changes would result in action by multiple stakeholders. And that last bullet is highway safety education programming is primarily supported under the NHTSA federal grant program. So to be at the ready to conduct education and outreach on specific messages depends on timing to accommodate entities to identify efforts and develop programming. All right, that was a lot of words I threw in.
Well, from what I understand from that is if you make a change to a motor vehicle law, it's a significant lift to educate the public, but there is a process in place to do that. But it is getting a change in that we'll all learn as we go into anything to the next section of miscellaneous motor vehicle law. It is a lot of work, but there is a process to do it. Representative Burke?
I just want to say that, we have done over the years increased safety for bicyclists. 2011, I think it was, the safe passing law. It was just like you must consider, it wasn't a specific distance that you needed to pass the bicycles by. And then last year, before whatever, we did the 4-foot rule. And I think there has been, the process hasn't been, fast, but we've had different periods where we realized done some safety measures and then realized maybe they weren't quite enough. So I think it's interesting that we're considering this as probably a possible next step.
Here we go.
Yeah, I would say sort of the same thing in what I read from this. You know, if we were to move forward with this, we'd want to give all the stakeholders, AOT and everybody else, time to be ready for it before you'd actually throw the switch. That's sort of what I, pick up as the most critical thing if we were to move forward.
Yeah, and I would just, yeah, I mean, I could just say it, and some of it is like, one of the pieces that I did do through this is talking to each of the agencies to identify, how much of a lift it is. And for some of it, it is just standard practice. So like if there is a law change, that would infect the driver's manual, for instance, then that's something that happens frequently. And I know that when we talk about using the example of the 4-foot rule change, that was a slight change from recommended to required. So that was something that they were able to quickly address. But so some of these might not necessarily be the deemed like a heavy lift. It's business as usual, but that still takes time. And one of the things that was noted for that specific instance is we now offer that in multiple languages. So it's just making sure that you can have those all done. And for the 4-foot rule, again, the vulnerable road users that we currently have work with closely are Locomotion and the Vermont Health Department. They did have material through their Watch for Me that already did message the recommended 4-foot passing. So they were able to take that and pivot. So it's really all about what is the change and how much how do we need to convey that? And is it something new or not? So, but it is, the main takeaway here is that just the expectations of there needs to be the time to prepare.
Okay, we just got to real quick because we're ready to move to our next one.
Do you guys use, like, I know you have like an Instagram account and I imagine you have like TikTok or something. Do you guys use that to get information out?
Do not know. We do have our state highway safety office. There is a person that is responsible for those. So I know that through that, and also our partners that we do partner with to do this, they have social media. So there's various ways that it goes out, but I do not know.
I think I've seen some things on Instagram, with just related to AOT things. It's kind of neat to see that, what you guys are doing in that area. That might be a way to communicate with certain groups that maybe are not fall under the net of like who AARP engages and stuff.
Okay, and we're all set. We're going to move on to our next. We have a next presenter. So Amanda and Jesse, thank you very much. And yes, came to hear that portion of it. We'll address those kind of thing, 3 questions we've talked about as a committee and figure out what the next step, next testimony or next piece. Thank you very much. And for the committee, we're based on requests and information when we were reviewing the budget. There's a huge pass through. I don't know exactly what the right term. The agency's handling a significant federal money on headed to South Burlington area, which was called the East-West Alternative Transportation Crossing Project. I think we're talking about a big, huge bridge for pedestrians and bikes. I'm really interested in seeing and hearing a lot more about it and where it's at and where it's going. And we appreciate very much for joining us via Zoom. And I'm guessing you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Thank you. For the record, Alana Blanchard, City of South Burlington Community Development Director. Really pleased to be here today to talk to you about the East-West Alternative Transportation Crossing. This project has been a long time in the making. We've had it on our official map since the 1990s. I do have a PowerPoint if you'd like me to present it. I'm not sure, or if you have questions, we can start there.
interested in seeing it, but if there's questions, I don't know how easy it'll be to see if we raise hands in the meantime or whatnot, but
Okay, great. Thank you.
slide along.
Um, let's see. Sorry, I just have to make sure I can share it. Think of
If you look to the bottom of your screen, there should be a rectangle that says share.
got it. Thank you. That is not my presentation.
Thanks, great.
Great screen.
Okay, there, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the alternative transportation crossing over I-89 is a keystone project for building a walkable, bikeable downtown in South Burlington. And it's been linked to our TIF district, our downtown initiative, otherwise known as City Center. It's also a regional keystone project in that it links Burlington, South Burlington, and Williston for bicyclists. And this is sort of an overview of the project. You can see the Cloverleaf exit 14 and how the project wraps around the Cloverleaf. It's the busiest intersection in Vermont, as we like to say. It has a lot of conflicts, and it is often noted in plans and studies as an incredible barrier to walking and biking in this area, but especially bicycling. As I mentioned, it has been on the official map for a long time, and it fits into other initiatives, which I'm going to briefly talk about before talking about the project a little bit more in depth. These are initiatives that are mainly TIF district or federally funded, so that you can see on the upper left along Williston Road goes east-west on this slide, and of course the interstate is right here, and then Dorset Street goes north-south. So the east-west crossing connects us across the interstate, and then just off the screen is where Burlington begins. And so it's a huge connection for our area largest employer, UVM and UVM Medical Center. And then we have other initiatives that are partially federally funded through VTrans or directly in partnership with VTrans through with federal funds, as well as tax increment financing projects that are funded in order to bring this area that had been very suburban in form to being a more walkable and bikeable downtown. And so this includes a shared use path along the south side of Williston Road, a connection of Garden Street from between Trader Joe's, Healthy Living, and the EMS that connects across Market Street, which was recently rebuilt with federal funding and tax increment financing, connecting to Midas Drive and reconfiguring the intersection at Al's French Fries, and then also the intersection slightly, not as dramatically, at the Price Chopper Plaza corner. And then there's also a shared use path that will connect a neighborhood in south of Barrett Street. You can't see it, it's off the screen, is the middle school and the high school for South Burlington. So that brings this neighborhood in much easier walking and biking distance with South of here. So this bridge, though, fundamentally connects us to Burlington, the people that live in Burlington, that work in the many businesses in this area, and people that live in this area or will live in this area and that work in the many businesses and institutions in Burlington. And so just a part of that, UVM and UVM Medical Center have invested heavily in City Center, in building housing along Market and Garden Street, and several of the buildings opened in the past year. And you can see overall in City Center, we have 737 new homes that have opened since 2012. And we have in our pipeline 933 total homes. And then outside of the TIF district, we have 196 that have been developed. So quite a few, I'm sorry, this does not include the pipeline. So this does not include, this does include the pipeline because it's all approved. Sorry. So one of the, and I bring this up partially because when UVM and UVM Medical Center invested in these projects, they specifically noted the bridge as part of why this housing now felt very close to the Hill institutions. So the East-West Crossing project was scoped in the 2010s, so mid-2010s. We had 2 rounds of public meetings and focus groups to understand, was this a bridge? Was this a gondola? The design began in earnest in 2022 when we received federal funding. There were 3 public meetings, multiple focus groups. One of our commitments as a Biden administration priority was equity outreach to underrepresented regional community members. So we had a meeting, for example, with the local mosque, for which they provided translators. And I think it was one of the first touches that community had with the city for just a regular community project. We also met with Vermont Professionals of Color and other organizations in the area. I will note, because folks ask, that people have the same concerns. They want to make sure that their children are safe going over the bridge and that they feel safe. So the funding for this project, as I mentioned, is tax increment financing. This is actually located outside of the TIF district, but was recognized during the approval of our TIF district as directly serving that downtown. So it's eligible for 30% tax increment financing. In 2021, we had been applying for federal discretionary grants for many years. So on our 4th try, we did receive a grant. And at that time, we thought that would be sufficient to fund the project. And we worked with VTrans. We received a call from the Vermont Agency of Transportation, the Municipal Assistance Bureau, fairly quickly. And it was from a team that we had worked with before on Market Street. And they convinced us that because of the federal tracking requirements, all of the different orders that need to be complied with, that we should work with them. And I'm very grateful that they did and that we did work with them, because it is certainly, they have helped us immensely in working through the process and keeping the project on track. So they have provided interface for the project within VTrans and the different departments, and then also on federal issues. So things like environmental protection, making sure that we met all of our compliance requirements. And then 2022 happened, and we were significantly underfunded for the project. And so we began applying again for grants. We applied for 3 different discretionary grants, some of which had multiple pots of money associated with them, and received a 2023 Reconnecting Communities pilot grant. And just a little bit more on the funding. So this project has not yet been obligated. We are currently at the end of the design right-of-way construction drawing plans, which means that they all need to be packaged up in the next week or 2, and then they go into the federal system for obligation. That system is closed. So we are not sure what will happen. We are proceeding as if we will be able to fund the project using federal funds. And we'll let you know if anything changes on that front. I'm not sure. I think many other entities are in this boat at the moment, or in this position. So.
Well, that's a great pausing spot for a question amongst the committee. Representative McCoy has a question for you.
Yes, thank you. So, would this be a project that would go in the white book?
It is in the white book as a significant pass-through for that section. There's like an 11, so we have our normal funding and then now this, I think it was 11 million.
That's right. I wanna know
$11 million
the
blip we can see because of this project.
And
It's
then-
a big balance and it's a pass.
$11 million funded state, or is it the total, including the federal grants?
This is the federal, my understanding, that's the federal grant portion. Our part of that, our section is normally is sort of level funded in that program.
So how much is the state responsible for? This is what my question is.
I'm sorry, my understanding, maybe I could, maybe our witness can answer that better, but my understanding is that that's a zero. This is an earmark for federal, that our state portion is AOT transportation dollars is zero, but I could be wrong.
Is that correct, Ilona?
That is correct. I think the Municipal Assistance Bureau is funded out of a different federal pot,
Okay,
is my understanding.
okay.
Well, we
So-
will,
You don't have all of the plans completed yet.
They are ready to do our submittal for obligation. So they are being packaged for the obligation submittal.
Okay,
And so, yeah, so the project overall is being prepared for bid this spring.
okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, so that I think there are some. Sorry.
no, if you were, before you're moving, if you're just still talking on this, please keep going. Before you go on to the next part, I guess I was saying for the committee speed, when we look at, as we come back to the next year and the next year, we see these cases with programs where there's a big blip of money, but it wasn't our transportation money, it wasn't state money. But we do need to note that you don't want to make a future decision on a program or any review without understanding that sometimes the only way that the federal money flows into the state is through the Agency of Transportation. And
Yeah.
maybe it's a minor point, but when you see a huge blip like that, you gotta know, and we see it in the budget, it does make the budget higher. Whatever the final number was, 858 million, but we are passing through 11 million to South Burlington. So
Thank you, thank you.
I think that we're all clear on that. I'm not 100% clear. But our opponent friend's nodding his head. I've confused that enough. Representative Fouch, help me out here.
Hi, Elena, thank you for this presentation. Problems with the federal grant, put that aside. Does it include or are the plans in place for all the interconnections within South Burlington, the smaller pieces that, help get people to the bridge? Are those, what's the status of those and the funding of those pieces?
Yeah, so this is a better depiction of the actual project. So we make complete connections to the Staples Plaza, to the path on Dorset Street and to Quarry Hill. We also make a complete connection to the University Mall. The University Mall connection is to a drive aisle and to limited sidewalks. So we see that as the University Mall repositions itself in the future, they will certainly go through some renovations or reconstruction. And at that time, there'll be an opportunity to build in a more pedestrian friendly and bicycle friendly connection through the property. But there is, so the current, there we go. Can you see my arrow?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so this connection right here is to the University Mall. And it lets out near a sidewalk that goes to the old Sears building, which is right here. But it's not a nice connection to Dorset Street. Whereas this connection for Quarry Hill lets out right onto a shared use path that then will cross over to Spears Street and go to UVM Athletics. So very different.
So my question is, with the federal funding for the bridge and the other pieces that we're talking about that sort of link them, particularly on the South Burlington side, are those still in the planning stages or
Yes.
or some of them, already have funding? Will some require state funding?
No, those are all funded. They all have city tax increment financing. Depending on the level of design and how prices change in the future, we may look for gap funding to the state, but at the moment, they're all funded.
Okay, thank you very much.
Along that line, so if you were back up on that state where you had multiple intersections circled and pieces a couple of slides ago, are there timelines on a couple of those?
Sure.
One more-
So
Is there any kind of timelines on the yellows and the orange and the red? I mean, are they 10 years
Yeah.
out, 5 years out? I don't need
Yes.
exact.
Sure. So all of the red circles are traffic lights along Dorset Street and on Heinsberg Road, excluding these ones. So these ones here, those are in process now. I know the Heinsberg Road light just went out to bid. And so that I believe will be constructed this summer. Garden Street, we expect to be built, this portion here to be built in the fall, as well as the City Center Park connection. And then this portion of Garden Street, either this fall or next year, and then this section in 2026, and this one also likely in 2026.
A lot of
So
exciting.
2026 will be a big year.
Yeah.
Thank you for the extra
Yeah.
detail. Representative Lally has a question for you.
Yeah, just a comment, really. I think this project really shows the great opportunities that come with integrating transportation and land use for livability, affordability, economic vitality, everything else. So it's very exciting and I'm incredibly envious. I'm sure a lot of us are feeling that way.
It's definitely a once in a generation type of project, so it's.
Great. Representative Couch?
Yeah, I'll just weigh in the same thing. Personal experience, I commuted by bicycle from Heinsberg to Williston, and my wife worked at UVM, and at the end of many days, I would join her to do something. And I tried going on that cloverleaf a few times, had an accident, and I ended up going all the way to Swift just to go around it, which, was fine, but nearly impossible to not only bike, but to walk that cloverleaf. And when you look, as you clearly showed, how many jobs and homes and shopping is, on both sides of that. And the fact that you really take your life in your hands going across that cloverleaf, it really is, I don't recommend it for anybody.
Okay.
I do have a few more slides, but we may have covered most of that ground already. Depending on your time.
We have time. I was curious if there's more of this idea of what the concept looks like and anything along that line.
Yeah.
Any of the architectural pieces or any of the kind of vision of what you think how it's going to integrate into the piece?
Sure.
And
yeah. So we we have all of our permits, with the exception of the Act 250, that's a minor permit, and is in progress. And that's really not related to the project, but more, the adjacent existing Act 250, permits that exist on adjoining properties. Sorry, there we go. Okay, so this is the concept for the project, and the architecture itself is fairly similar to the concept. So the U-Mall access will actually come right around here and come out onto the U-Mall property right here, and it sort of the ramp comes down. This is, I think, we're using what are called MSE walls. So they're, it's concrete, that is held together with earth, in between the two concrete walls and battens. And those, are supporting the path, and it allows it to have more of a curved structure, which we felt was very important in creating a structure that people felt was attractive and that they wanted to use. We recognize that although this is not much longer, it's about a third longer than going across, it still visually can seem much longer than, and that you might be better off just going straight across. So we wanted people to feel attracted to the overall bridge and to want to go up onto it. So the pathway is more curved, and that facilitates bicycle travel as well as walking. We did look at doing other ways of making it like a more aerial bridge with more girders. And so this also has an unusual construction, not for bridges. There's a lot of bridges that are built this way, but in Vermont, we don't have other pedestrian bridges that are what's called a tub construction. And so rather than a girder, it actually has a shape underneath that holds the stability and allows it to be a curve. And then there are, and you can just see, there's a screen, it's kind of a windscreen on the south side, and then a shorter one on the north side.
So I
Sorry?
just, question,
More questions.
Yes.
We have lots of time, so we're good.
I'm not quite sure how much the annual snowfall in South Burlington is, but how are you gonna plow this thing? Do you have a little, like, sidewalk plow that's available to plow this, or?
We do
Just
have
thinking-
yes, yeah, that's a great question. So we do have sidewalk plows. This is actually 14 feet wide. So we will be using it's like a jointed loader. So a little bit bigger than a sidewalk plow, and that'll allow us to both plow, but also to put a bucket on it, and so if we get a really big snow like we did recently, we'll be able to actually truck the snow off the bridge, and off the sides.
Right, great, thank you.
Just like when we were kids, huh?
Throw it over the side.
Oh,
That's not
boy.
good.
Let's not. Representative White, help us out here. We're going off the rails.
This has nothing to do with snow removal, my question. Two questions, actually. First, just on the local financing, I think you mentioned a TIF program, and just curious how much that is for as part of I'm assuming that's part of the federal match.
Yes, it's for, I believe at the moment, it's like for 4.6 million. And then the two federal grants are for I think it's 8.6 and 8 million. It's like 8.02 or something.
So around 16 million for the federal?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, that is an architectural feat. And, such high visibility and such a wonderful addition to the Burlington area. Is there an opportunity is there an artistic opportunity there? I know we've met with some representatives from the Vermont Arts Council or something like that, and they've done some beautiful, renditions on bridges or underpasses. And I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity? Is that something you all have considered?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So we do have a public art committee, and then as part of the city center TIF district, we have a requirement of I believe it's 2% of the project budget, or 50,000, whichever is less, be spent on art. And so in this case, we asked the committee for their recommendation, and they recommended that an artist be incorporated into the project team. And so the project team each project team that responded to the RFP for a design had a different artist included within their team. And so this one had a local artist, Tyler Vendituoli. And so he presented during the public meeting outreach and eventually worked around to what he's going to do for the project is create birds of Vermont. So birds that either migrate through or are in Vermont around life size that will be affixed like to railings or light posts or signposts. And a few of them will be mounted in like the ground, like there's a little bit of foliage, like a little bed right here. And so they'll be in that also. So I think there'll be about 40 on the project. And then the other thing that the committee said during the design, there were several designs, some of which were rejected. I mean, there were 3 designs, 2 of them were rejected. But what the committee said is that they really wanted the architect on the project to think of the bridge as a piece of art, but then also to incorporate art into it. So they were very happy with the outcome.
Thank you. That sounds like a great opportunity, and you're a step ahead of us. And I mean, I love the idea of migratory birds, and maybe there's an education component, letting people know about the birds that do pass through Vermont, because it is such an important corridor for migration. So thank you. That's great.
Representative Burke?
This is such an exciting project. Really, it's great to hear about these things. I was just going to add to Representative White's comments is that the Vermont Arts Council has these animating infrastructure grants that those were the grants that we saw the pictures of. So, you know, in terms of any extra funding, that may be a source for other possibilities.
We will see if we may need it. We'll see. Yes. But yeah, that is a really terrific program. Yeah. So we haven't applied for it for this project yet, but that is something that we will definitely keep in mind.
So are we to the end? Nope.
Almost.
I was curious if you had any idea of how many people, oh, here we go. Oh, maybe that's what you're getting. Any idea of the amount of traffic that you anticipate? The amount, I don't know how many people live in that. I think you said it was Quarry Hill or Quarry.
Yeah, Quarry Hill. Yeah. So we weren't really sure. I mean, we have a lot of estimates, and we think it's going to be very popular. But for federal grants, you have to put together estimates. So we used a count from 2019 that was conducted in August, and we used standard engineering guidance to develop an annual estimate for that. So we estimated that there were 152 daily trips, and then that we would increase that by 634 annually. We also estimated a reduction in vehicle crashes because of folks crossing the on and off ramps, and also the weaving that just by having less pedestrians and bicyclists in the road or on the sidewalk, that would reduce the things that drivers were having to pay attention to, and that would also reduce the crash rate. So we don't. I'm sorry.
Sorry to interrupt on that. Is it anticipated that those current sidewalks will stay open, or will it be an effort to direct everyone to the bridge as opposed to being open on those sidewalks, I guess? About how dangerous it is to go across them now.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, depending upon your ability, it's very uncomfortable to cross, but it is not impossible to cross. And so those facilities will stay as they are. as long as that intersection is configured the way it is today. However, all of our signage provides distances to use the bridge. So we're not telling people they should be crossing on the sidewalks, even though they do have that option. So we're trying to tell them it's very short and easy to use the bridge rather than crossing the other way.
Representative Wells?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
Oh, sorry.
Go.
I'm just noticing the sort of interesting little spurs that you guys are creating to anticipate the future redevelopment of the mall and that sort of thing, which will totally happen with this. But I'm just wondering if there are any ways to give somebody who might have, let's say, regrets about taking the conventional approach for some reason, like get a little second chance to get onto the much more pleasant, comfortable, safe, other adjectives I can't think of right now, opportunity to go across this? Are you guys sort of like, like a grid, a network, right?
right.
As opposed to just reproducing for bicyclists the same kind of like highway experience, I'm not that that's what you're doing, but I just was wondering if that was something you guys were thinking about.
So the very expensive part of this project is every time we cross a roadway, because we have to get up to a certain elevation.
Okay.
So that was really limiting. And that was one of the reasons that we ended up going so far to the south. I would hope that someone would turn around and come back and get onto the path. But I would like to think that we are not adverse if more is happening adjacent to the project, that if there is an opportunity for an additional connection, that could be done.
Question I had, what is the height of this, Aileen?
I believe it's 34 feet above the grade of I-89.
34
Sure,
feet?
there's a federal highway rules that they had to follow pretty clearly about getting, through the highway and whatnot. Wow.
And I'm not,
Another question?
yeah,
Well, I mean,
I'm sorry,
that seems pretty high. I mean, I know when you go under overpasses, if trucks, height is 14 feet or something. 34 feet sounds really high.
yeah. I think the interstate serves a variety of purposes is my guess, but I'm completely speculating and probably shouldn't talk about it. But I think, every once in a while they carry a very wide load. And so I'm guessing it's for that. I do have, so we, as part of our federal reporting, we have had the RAISE grant now for, and have been in design since 22. And so we have set up a data collection system. It took us a while to figure out how we were going to do it. It's kind of hard on Williston Road because of the 6 lanes. It's pretty tough on rubber. So we ended up using cameras. And so we were able to develop our baseline data for the project. So different from an estimate, still estimated, but based on so the standard, which is, I think it's 3 per week for 3 different months to give you a quarterly average. And so interestingly, and I'm going to attribute this to the new housing that has gone in, there's more users on the weekend, and possibly also because of the university, but I'm not sure. On the weekend, there is a higher use of the path than during the week. And it's actually much higher than we estimated. And so I don't know the breakdown for how much of it is attributed to the new housing and the new occupants versus, maybe we have always had a much higher number of users than we thought we did. And there was also a surprising number of people that were in the roadway. So it's much lower, but kind of surprising. And then the vehicular crashes, unfortunately, were in line with what they had been before. That was based on the VTrans query data. So still the same, so. And then these are some other views. As I said, we are planning to bid this spring, and to open, in December 2026, and we hope to see you there.
Yeah, ribbon cutting.
And I'm happy to answer more questions or, go through some of these in more detail if you would like.
I do have a question about when you were talking about the intersections and the improvements along Williston Road and kind of back around towards the city center, I guess you're calling it, the other side of the mall. What about I guess would be the north side of Williston Road and access and people that would want to use the bridge, but their destinations are on the north side and those traffic improvements? How do people benefit on the north side of the?
Yeah, so the north side, when we initially proposed the Williston Road streetscape, we had planned to do a streetscape on both sides of Williston Road. And we did do a study for that area and looked at possibilities. We ended up putting the path on the south side, and that just kept all of the facilities aligned with each other. That being said, as the north side redevelops, we do expect an improved sidewalk to be installed on the north side. And then the last redesign of this intersection included sidewalks on all four sides, crosswalks on all four sides of this intersection, which it had always only had them on the east side. So we're slowly, incrementally moving towards a more pedestrian-friendly area. And then there is an official map road that I'm not sure exactly how it goes, but it goes behind and parallel to Williston Road, which will provide an additional alternate route to the north. So unfortunately, because it is not funded through the TIF district, we had to make some harder choices just because of there was not as much development, especially 2019 to 2021. So we weren't going to receive as much funding as we had planned for. So there were some reductions in some scope for projects. But as development occurs, these properties will be required to install a streetscape, which is a little more piecemeal than is occurring with a public project, I would say.
Thank you, Emma. Yes, yeah, a lot. Any other questions, pieces? We really appreciate you joining us. It's a very large project, and it's really nice to see all the other pieces that go with it. And I guess we're all pretty much more informed than we were before we started. There's certainly a lot of enthusiasm I could hear amongst the members. So we certainly, there you go, wish you luck on your project and on this obligation piece and what the next step is. I guess there's a lot of uncertainty around that for everyone. And we appreciate you joining us and sharing it with us. Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
It's a lot. Exciting.
I mean, that place is so congested.
Yeah, I mean,
You can't walk.
yeah.
It's a disaster. Go that way.
If I was, first person.
Yeah. And you gotta go a long way around, a couple of miles, you know.
I don't know if it's bicycle.
Just get around, you know.
People who do daily.
And I think it's just a matter of time before the the development hopscotches across to Dorset and that mall redevelops.
Yeah.
And that'll be fantastic. I mean, who would not want to live along that?
I think we're gonna, depending on whether committee discussion piece or have any other, we will go ahead and have start our break a little bit earlier, and we're back at